Thank you again, Annette. I've always liked songs with big climaxes and voices that can do that. Conversely, I was never a big fan of Julie Andrews. I preferred voices that had big climaxes in them. A sound that felt like it could be flung against the wall and acoustically explode all over the room. By contrast, I'm so glad Joan's not here today. Julie Andrews' voice seemed to be so protected, so carefully parsed out in such precious, tiny little amounts. It always felt like the song was over before it got started. So, Michael and I were flying to New York, and he suggested we were on some plane that you could watch, movies, I think like JetBlue or something. And Sound of Music came up. And he said, so let's watch Sound of Music. And I said, oh no, not me. Of course I knew the music. I had sung it and played it more than a few times, but I attended a high school in the 60s that refused to do integrated casting of school musicals. And so I responded that year by not going to our school's production of Sound of Music. So no, I was certainly not going to spend 3 hours 30,000 feet above the earth listening to Julie Andrews singing in a musical in which I could not participate. I would have been a wonderful Von Trapp. But there we were on that plane, and we had a long way to go, and I never win these arguments anyway. So I said, okay. By the time she and that family had finished the song, Do, Re, Mi, I was such a Julie Andrews fan, I cannot even tell you. I was crying all the way through by the end of the movie, and Michael was walking up and down the aisle saying, you see that black man? He's never seen Sound of Music before. He didn't know. She was amazing in that movie. What Julie Andrews did in that Rodgers and Hammerstein extravaganza, up and down the stairs of the Von Trapp house, on the road, in a rowboat, in the garden, all through the house, was teach those bad little Von Trapp kids, and most of you and I in the Western world, a musical technique referred to by musicologists as solfege. And applying the theory of solfege to the 8-note diatonic scale from which most of the music that you and I love has been written, you can learn to identify the harmonic distances between pitches. That's what allows musicians to write, play, and sing at such a high level. That's what our choir uses. Our choir can look at a note on a piece of paper and measure the distance to the next note. That is called solfege. Musicians have developed the skill of looking at or hearing one note and figuring out the distance in their head to the next note. So if this is Do, then I know how to find Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti, Do, and so on. It's so cool. It's a wonderful system. And secondly, hang in there with me. I'm not going to go too far into this. Solfege teaches you that, again, using this diatonic scale, you generally can begin a musical piece and by the end get back to where you started, but the end is both the same and infinitely better because of the marvelous journey you took. As Julie Andrews instructed us, that will bring us back to Do. Wow! That movie was made 50 years ago. My new heroine and best friend, music teacher, Miss Andrews, in hosting a celebrity rescreening of the beloved movie, did not say, I am the star who, in spite of that ignorant little preacher in Burbank, I still made a lot of money. She didn't say that while he didn't like me, most of the rest of you did, and you learned a little bit about music. What she said at that screening was, let's start at the very beginning, which we all know is a very
good place to start.
The coming of the Messiah was prayed for by the chosen people and prophesied to the chosen people for nearly 1,000 years. And one of the strongest pieces that the people prayed for and that the prophets prophesied to the downtrodden and destroyed people of the divided kingdom of Israel about was how the Messiah would move them, would change them, and would restore them to something that was lost. All would be changed. They would be transformed. In the 51st Psalm, the people prayed, change us, restore to us the joy of our salvation. In other words, deliver us from this servitude, this captivity. Their prayer in Psalm 126 was much more specific, much more in God's face. Annihilate our poverty and hopelessness. Change us. Restore our fortunes, O God. In other words, don't say you are our God and leave us unchanged in this God-forsaken situation. Change us. Transform us. On and on. The book of Lamentations cries, change our condition. Restore us to yourself, O God. Before the Romans had conquered Israel, Israel had been conquered by the Assyrians and the Babylonians. The prophet Nahum had predicted that in spite of the unspeakable cruelty visited upon them, O Israel, the Lord will move you, the Lord will change you from being the victims, the injured parties, the sufferers, the casualties, and fatalities of your conquerors. The Lord will transform you, restore you to the splendor of your ancestors, the splendor of Jacob, if you will just change yourselves and turn from your wicked ways. So, when Jesus came, and when Jesus comes upon the thousands of people sitting there waiting to hear him in the scripture that Annette read to us, are you the Messiah, the one who's going to facilitate this change we have waited so long for, or should we seek another? Jesus had to go up on a mountain to be seen and heard because there were thousands gathered there. Perhaps he had to call his disciples around him, as Annette read, so that perhaps he wouldn't be overrun. You see, Jesus' reputation had preceded him. In the verses right before this Matthean Beatitudes began, the evangelist Matthew makes a point of saying, Jesus had gone throughout Galilee, teaching in the synagogues, preaching the good news of the coming realm, and healing every disease and sickness among the people. How could this not be the change that a desperate people were seeking? And the people came. They came from Syria. They came from Galilee. They came from the Decapolis, all looking for healing and for hope. The people weren't just waiting for Jesus by that mountain. Many had followed Jesus up to that mountain, hoping against hope for change. And Jesus' resume had the crowd's attention. Most likely they were willing to accept anything he had to say as, you'll pardon the pun, gospel. Well, like Julie Andrews, what doesn't Jesus say? He doesn't say, I, with no formal training, have been teaching in your temples and challenging your teachers. Jesus doesn't say, you see what I can do. I've healed each of you of every infirmity and disease that you have brought to me. Jesus doesn't say, coming from the Creator, I am high and you are low. Jesus doesn't say, as the devil said to Jesus when he was tempted in the wilderness, follow me and all that you have lost will be restored. All that you have promised will be granted. Your way of living, your poverty, your abuse, your depression will all be profoundly changed. What Jesus does say is this: you are already on the right road. You are already connected. You, as the Latin Vulgate translates, you are already, in spite of your individual misfortunes, in the happiest of places. You are blessed.